Laura didn't waste any time after leaving Dr. Miller's office. She drove straight to the hospital, clutching the referral slip tightly in her hand. Her mind raced with questions. What could be so unusual about a bite that it warranted immediate testing? Was she imagining things, or had Dr. Miller truly looked afraid? The hospital was bustling when she arrived. Nurses hurried down the halls, their shoes squeaking against the tiled floor. Patients sat in chairs, some scrolling through phones while others stared blankly at the walls. Laura approached the front desk and handed over the referral slip. The receptionist glanced at it briefly before nodding. "Take a seat," the woman said, gesturing toward the waiting area. "Someone will call you soon." Sitting there, Laura felt out of place. Around her, people coughed, sneezed, or whispered quietly to companions. Children played with toys scattered across the floor, yet none of them seemed to carry the same weight of uncertainty that she did. To everyone else, this was just another trip to the hospital. For Laura, it felt like stepping into the unknown. After what felt like an eternity, a nurse called her name. Laura followed the woman down a long hallway lined with closed doors until they reached a small examination room. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. A chair, a bed, and various pieces of medical equipment filled the space. Laura sat down nervously, her fingers tapping against her knee. A few minutes later, another doctor entered the room. This one was younger than Dr. Miller, probably in her mid-30s, and introduced herself as Dr. Rachel Bennett. She wore a crisp white coat and carried a clipboard. Her demeanor was calm and professional, but there was something sharp in her eyes, as though she were analyzing every detail. "So, Mrs. Dawson," Dr. Bennett began, pulling up a stool. "Dr. Miller mentioned your case. Can you tell me more about what happened?" Laura recounted the story again. The walk in the park, the bite, the strange discoloration. As she spoke, Dr. Bennett listened intently, jotting notes on her clipboard. When Laura finished, the doctor nodded and asked to see the wound. Reluctantly, Laura rolled up her pant leg and unwrapped the bandage. The purple marks had spread further overnight, now covering most of her ankle. The skin looked inflamed, almost bruised, and tiny red dots dotted the edges. Dr. Bennett leaned in closer, examining the area carefully. She pressed lightly around the swollen tissue, making Laura wince. "This is unusual," Dr. Bennett murmured, echoing Dr. Miller's earlier words. "Have you noticed anything else? Any changes in how you feel?" Laura hesitated. "Well, I've been having trouble sleeping, and my leg hurts more than it should, but nothing else really." Dr. Bennett frowned thoughtfully. "We'll need to run some tests. Blood work, imaging scans, anything that might give us clues about what we're dealing with." Over the next hour, Laura underwent a series of procedures. Technicians drew vials of blood, poked her with needles, and guided her through machines that hummed softly as they scanned her body. Each step left her feeling increasingly uneasy. The doctors and nurses moved efficiently, their faces polite but unreadable. No one offered explanations, and Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was being kept from her. When the tests were finally done, Dr. Bennett returned to the examination room. She held a folder in her hands, her expression unreadable. Sitting down across from Laura, she took a deep breath before speaking. "The results are complicated," she admitted. "Your blood work shows elevated levels of certain compounds we don't typically see in humans. They're not natural, neither plant nor animal. In fact, they resemble synthetic materials used in experimental biotechnology." Laura blinked, struggling to process what she'd just heard. "Experimental biotech? Are you saying someone created this?" Dr. Bennett hesitated. "It's possible. We're still running additional analyses, but based on what we know so far, it seems likely. Whatever bit you may have carried traces of engineered material." The words hit Laura like a ton of bricks. Engineered material? That sounded like something out of a science fiction movie, not real life. She shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. "What does that mean for me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Am I going to be okay?" Dr. Bennett sighed. "I wish I could give you a clear answer. Right now we're monitoring your condition closely. You haven't shown signs of severe illness, which is good, but these compounds can behave unpredictably. Some patients experience rapid deterioration, while others remain stable for extended periods. Laura swallowed hard. And if it gets worse? The doctor paused, choosing her words carefully. If the situation escalates, we'll explore treatment options. But I won't lie to you. This isn't something we encounter often. We're dealing with uncharted territory here. The gravity of the situation settled over Laura like a heavy blanket. Uncharted territory. The phrase echoed in her mind, filling her with dread. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead she nodded numbly. There was nothing else she could do. As the day wore on, Laura remained in the hospital under observation. Nurses checked on her regularly, taking her temperature, measuring her blood pressure, and asking endless questions about how she felt. Despite their efforts, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that she was part of some larger mystery, one she wasn't meant to understand. That night, alone in her hospital room, Laura stared at the ceiling. The lights had been dimmed, casting the room in shadowy hues. Machines beeped softly in the background, their rhythmic sounds doing little to soothe her racing thoughts. Sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, images of glowing purple, veins spreading across her body haunted her dreams. Around midnight, Laura heard voices outside her door. At first, she thought it was just staff talking, but then she realized the conversation was hushed, urgent. Curiosity got the better of her, and she quietly slipped out of bed to listen. "We need to contain this," one voice said. A man's. "If word gets out, it's already spreading faster than anticipated," another replied, this time a woman. "Her vitals are holding steady, but the markers in her bloodstream suggest adaptation. We can't risk exposure." Laura froze. Contain? Adaptation? Exposure? None of it made sense, but the implication was clear. Whatever was inside her posed a threat, not just to her, but possibly to others. Her heart pounded as she crept back to bed. Who were those people? Were they doctors or something else entirely? And why were they treating her like some kind of experiment? The next morning, Dr. Bennett visited again. She brought updates from the lab, though they weren't reassuring. The foreign compounds in Laura's system were mutating, adapting to her biology in ways no one could predict. While her outward symptoms remained mild, internal changes were occurring rapidly. "We're doing everything we can," Dr. Bennett assured her, though her tone betrayed her uncertainty. "But you need to prepare yourself. This could escalate. Quickly." Laura nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. She needed answers, real ones, not vague reassurances or cryptic warnings. Determined to uncover the truth, she resolved to take matters into her own hands. Later that afternoon, when the nurses weren't looking, Laura borrowed a phone from a fellow patient and called Daniel. She told him everything, or as much as she dared. Together, they devised a plan. If the doctors wouldn't tell her what was going on, she'd find out herself. By evening, Laura had managed to sneak access to her medical records using a shared computer in the hospital lounge. What she discovered confirmed her worst fears. Buried deep within the files was mention of something called Project Chimera, a classified initiative involving hybrid organisms designed for extreme environments. The documents hinted that these creatures were capable of infecting hosts, altering their DNA in unpredictable ways. Laura's stomach churned as she read on. Escape, testing facility, potential contagion. The pieces fell into place. She must have encountered one of these hybrids during its escape from a nearby lab. Now its genetic material was inside her, changing her in ways she couldn't comprehend. Tears welled in her eyes as she closed the file. She had gone for a simple walk in the park, and now her life would never be the same. That night, after discovering the truth about Project Chimera, Laura lay awake in her hospital bed staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced with questions and fears. What did this mean for her? Could she trust anyone? Dr. Bennett, the nurses, even Daniel? The weight of what she had uncovered pressed down on her like a physical force. The next morning, Laura tried to act normal. She smiled politely when the nurses came in to check her vitals, answered their questions calmly, and pretended not to notice the way they exchanged worried glances. But inside, she was anything but calm. Every beep from the machines monitoring her felt louder, every shadow in the hallway darker. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Dr. Bennett visited again later that day. She brought new test results, though her tone remained guarded. "Your condition is stabilizing," she said, flipping through pages on her clipboard. "But we're still seeing unusual activity in your bloodstream." Laura nodded, feigning ignorance. "What kind of activity?" "It's hard to explain," Dr. Bennett replied carefully. "The compounds in your system are adapting faster than expected. They seem to be integrating with your cells, altering them in ways we don't fully understand." Laura clenched her fists under the blanket. She wanted to scream to demand answers, but she knew better. If she let on that she knew about Project Chimera, they might shut her out completely. Or worse, take drastic measures to silence her. Instead, she asked softly, "Is there anything I can do? Any treatment options?" Dr. Bennett hesitated. "We're exploring possibilities, but it's complicated. These compounds aren't natural, they were engineered. Treating them requires specialized knowledge." Engineered? The word sent a chill down Laura's spine. It confirmed what she already suspected. This wasn't some freak accident. Someone had created whatever was inside her, and now she was paying the price. As the days passed, Laura began experiencing strange symptoms. At first, they were subtle: a heightened sense of smell, sharper vision, an inexplicable surge of energy. But soon, they grew more intense. One evening, while sitting in her hospital room, she heard footsteps outside her door. Not just any footsteps, soft, deliberate ones, as if someone were trying not to be heard. Her heart pounded as she turned toward the sound. Was it another nurse making rounds, or something else entirely? Before she could decide, the door creaked, opened slightly. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, his face obscured by the dim light. He didn't introduce himself or offer an explanation. Instead, he simply stood there, studying her. "Who are you?" Laura demanded, her voice trembling. The man ignored her question. "You've been asking a lot of questions lately," he said instead, his tone cold and calculating. "About your condition, about the doctors treating you. I suggest you stop." Laura's blood ran cold. How did he know what she'd been doing? Had they been watching her all along? "I'm not doing anything wrong," she stammered. "I just want to know what's happening to me." The man took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "You're involved in something much bigger than you realize. Keep digging, and you'll regret it." With that, he turned and left, closing the door behind him. Laura sat frozen, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Who was that man? And why did he care so much about what she knew? Determined not to let fear control her, Laura decided to dig deeper. She needed proof, something concrete she could show Daniel, something that would help them figure out their next move. That night, when the hospital grew quiet, she slipped out of bed and made her way to the same computer terminal she'd used before. Security cameras dotted the corridors, but she kept her head down, hoping no one would notice. Once at the terminal, Laura logged back into her file. This time, she searched for anything related to Project Chimera. The documents were dense and technical, filled with jargon she barely understood. But one thing became clear. The hybrids created for the project weren't supposed to leave the lab. Their escape had been an accident, an oversight that could have catastrophic consequences. According to the files, these creatures were designed to adapt rapidly to new environments, using their host's DNA to evolve. Once integrated, they became nearly impossible to remove without killing the host. Worse still, the organisms carried the potential to spread, infecting others and creating a chain reaction that could spiral out of control. Laura's hands trembled as she read on. There was mention of containment protocols, experimental treatments, and contingency plans in case of widespread infection. It sounded like something out of a nightmare, a biological weapon unleashed by mistake, with no clear way to stop it. Suddenly, A noise startled her. Footsteps echoed down the hall, growing louder with each passing second. Panicking, Laura quickly closed the files and logged off. She ducked into a nearby supply closet just as two men in suits walked past, flashlights in hand. They stopped, briefly near the computer terminal, shining their lights over the area before moving on. When the coast was clear, Laura hurried back to her room, her heart pounding. She had seen enough. Whatever was inside her wasn't just dangerous. It was part of something far bigger, something that terrified even those who had created it. The next morning, Laura called Daniel again. His voice was strained when he answered, worry evident in every word. "Are you okay?" he asked immediately. "I'm fine," Laura lied, lowering her voice. "But I need you to come here. Bring my laptop and anything else you can find about government experiments or classified projects. We don't have much time." Daniel agreed without hesitation. By evening, he arrived at the hospital, slipping past security with surprising ease. Together, they pored over the information Laura had gathered, piecing together fragments of the puzzle. It wasn't easy. The data was incomplete, riddled with redactions and coded language. But slowly, a picture began to emerge. Project. Chimera wasn't just about creating hybrid organisms. It was about survival. The researchers believed Earth's changing climate and dwindling resources would eventually render large parts of the planet uninhabitable. To prepare for this future, they sought to engineer life forms capable of thriving in extreme conditions, deserts, Arctic zones, toxic wastelands. These hybrids were meant to pave the way for human colonization, serving as both tools and test subjects. But something had gone horribly wrong. The hybrids escaped containment, spreading beyond the lab and infecting unsuspecting hosts like Laura. Now, the very people responsible for creating them were scrambling to clean up the mess before it spiraled out of control. As Laura and Daniel worked, they realized how dire the situation truly was. If the organism inside her continued to adapt, it could reach a tipping point where removal became impossible. Even worse, if it spread to others, the consequences could be devastating. "We need to get out of here," Daniel said finally, breaking the silence. "If they find out what we know, they'll lock you away, or worse." Laura nodded reluctantly. She hated the idea of running, but staying put felt equally risky. "Where would we go?" "I don't know yet," Daniel admitted. "But we'll figure it out together." That night, as the hospital grew quiet, Laura packed a small bag with essentials. She left a note for Dr. Bennett, thanking her for her care but explaining that she couldn't stay. Then, under the cover of darkness, she and Daniel slipped out of the building, disappearing into the night. They drove aimlessly at first, putting as much distance between themselves and the hospital as possible. Neither spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts. For Laura, the road ahead felt uncertain and terrifying. She had no idea where it would lead, or whether she'd survive long enough to see its end. But one thing was clear. She couldn't trust anyone, not the doctors, not the government, not even the shadowy figures watching her every move. All she had was Daniel. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Laura and Daniel drove for hours, leaving the hospital far behind them. They didn't stop until they reached a small rundown motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a dingy room with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of mildew, but it would have to do. For now, staying off the grid was their top priority. Once inside, Laura collapsed onto the bed, her body exhausted but her mind racing. She stared at the ceiling, replaying everything she'd learned over the past few days. The bite, the strange symptoms, the mysterious men in suits. It all felt surreal, like something out of a movie. But this wasn't fiction. This was her life now. Daniel, meanwhile, got to work. He spread out the documents they'd brought with them across the rickety table near the window. Maps, notes, and screenshots of classified files formed a chaotic mosaic of information. His laptop hummed softly as he scrolled through pages detailing Project Chimera's origins, objectives, and failures. "We need to figure out what we're dealing with," Daniel said, his voice firm despite the exhaustion etched on his face. If we know more about these hybrids, maybe we can find a way to fight back. Laura nodded weakly. She wanted to help, but the weight of her condition made it hard to focus. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the man in the suit who had warned her not to dig deeper. Who were those people? Government agents? Scientists tied to the project? Whoever they were, they clearly didn't want her poking around. As Daniel worked, Laura began leafing through some of the papers. One document caught her eye, a report outlining the biological mechanisms behind the hybrid's ability to adapt. According to the text, the organisms used fragments of host DNA to evolve rapidly, integrating themselves into the host system in ways that defied conventional science. Once fully integrated, removal became nearly impossible without killing the host. The implications hit Laura like a punch to the gut. If what the document said was true, then the organism inside her wasn't just altering her biology. It was becoming part of her. And if it continued unchecked, there might come a point where she wouldn't be able to stop it. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What happens if I lose control?" He looked up from the laptop, his expression softening. "We're not going to let that happen," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes, we'll find a solution." But even as he spoke, doubt lingered in his eyes. Neither of them knew enough about the organism to guarantee anything. All they could do was keep moving forward and hope for the best. Over the next few days, Laura and Daniel pored over every scrap of information they could find. They pieced together bits of data, cross-referencing reports and analyzing patterns. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged. Project Chimera hadn't been created solely for environmental adaptation. Its creators also envisioned military applications. The hybrids were designed to infiltrate enemy lines, infecting soldiers and rendering them incapacitated or worse. This revelation chilled Laura to the bone. If the government saw her as a potential threat, a walking biohazard, they wouldn't hesitate to neutralize her. Containment protocols mentioned in the documents included quarantine, termination, or forced experimentation. None of those options sounded survivable. Despite the grim reality, Laura refused to give up. She started paying closer attention to her symptoms, documenting changes in her body as they occurred. Her strength had increased dramatically, allowing her to lift objects she previously couldn't budge. Her senses were sharper too. She could hear whispers from across the room and see details others might miss. But along with these enhancements came darker side effects. Vivid hallucinations plagued her nights, filling her dreams with twisted visions of shadowy figures and grotesque creatures. Sometimes, during moments of stress, she felt a surge of aggression bubbling beneath the surface, threatening to overwhelm her. One evening, while Daniel was asleep, Laura sat alone at the table, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Her face looked different somehow, paler, almost translucent. Dark circles ringed her eyes and her lips pressed into a thin line. Was this what the organism was doing to her? Changing her physically as well as mentally? She clenched her fists, trying to push away the fear gnawing at her insides. She had always been strong-willed, determined to face challenges head-on. But this was unlike anything she'd ever encountered. It wasn't just her body that was changing. It was her sense of self, her identity. How long before she stopped recognizing the person staring back at her? The next morning, Daniel suggested they reach out to someone who might be able to help. "We can't do this alone," he said. "There has to be someone, scientists, activists, whistleblowers, who knows about Project Chimera and wants to expose it." Laura hesitated. Trusting strangers felt risky, especially given how little they truly understood about the situation. Still, she knew Daniel was right. They needed allies if they were going to stand a chance against whatever forces were hunting them. Using encrypted communication tools, Daniel reached out to several contacts he'd discovered online, people rumored to specialize in uncovering government secrets. Most ignored his messages, but one responded, a woman named Dr. Elena Ross, a former biologist who claimed to have worked on early stages of Project Chimera before resigning due to ethical concerns. Dr. Ross agreed to meet them under strict conditions. No names, no locations shared in advance. Instead, she provided coordinates to a remote spot deep in the woods, promising to bring answers, and possibly a solution. 2 days later, Laura and Daniel arrived at the designated meeting place. A narrow dirt road led them to a clearing surrounded by towering trees. In the center stood a weathered cabin, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. As they approached, the door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged woman with sharp features and piercing green eyes. "You must be Laura," Dr. Ross said, stepping aside to let them in. Her tone was calm but wary, as though she expected trouble at any moment. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished but functional. Books and papers cluttered every surface, evidence of years spent researching forbidden topics. After offering them seats, Dr. Ross wasted no time getting to the point. "I read your message," she began, fixing Laura with an intense gaze. "And based on what you've described, I believe you're carrying one of the early-stage hybrids. The good news is that it hasn't fully integrated yet, which means there's still a chance to remove it." Laura's heart leapt. "How?" she asked eagerly. Dr. Ross hesitated. "It won't be easy. The procedure involves targeting the organism's synthetic components with radiation therapy. If done correctly, it should weaken the hybrid enough for your immune system to eliminate it. But it's dangerous, not just for you, but for anyone helping you. If the treatment fails, the organism could mutate further, making it even harder to contain." Laura exchanged a glance with Daniel. Neither of them liked the odds, but what choice did they have? Staying passive meant letting the organism take over completely. Taking action, no matter how risky, offered at least a sliver of hope. "When can we start?" Laura asked quietly. Dr. Ross nodded approvingly. "Tomorrow morning. We'll need to move quickly." That night, as Laura lay awake in the cramped guest room of the cabin, she thought about everything that had brought her here. From a simple walk in the park to fleeing for her life, her journey had taken twists and turns she never could have imagined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new risks. But for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of determination burning within her. No matter what happened, she vowed silently, she wouldn't go down without a fight. The next morning, Laura woke up early, her stomach churning with nerves. She could hear movement downstairs, Dr. Ross preparing the equipment they would need for the procedure. Each creak of the floorboard sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her body. What if something went wrong? What if the treatment failed and made things worse? Daniel was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. He looked exhausted but resolute. When he noticed Laura stirring, he gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You ready?" he asked softly. Laura nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "I don't think I have a choice," she replied, forcing a weak grin. "Let's just get this over with." They headed downstairs to find Dr. Ross deep in preparation. The basement had been transformed into a makeshift lab, complete with monitors, wires, and an array of unfamiliar tools. A narrow cot served as the operating table, draped with clean white sheets that seemed stark against the otherwise dingy surroundings. "This won't be easy," Dr. Ross warned as she motioned for Laura to lie down. "The radiation therapy targets the synthetic components of the organism inside you. It'll weaken it, but your body will also take a hit. You'll feel pain, lots of it, and there's no guarantee it'll work completely." Laura swallowed, hard but nodded. "Do whatever you have to do," she said firmly. "I can handle it." Dr. Ross gave her a long look, then turned to Daniel. "Stay close," she instructed. "She'll need support. If anything goes wrong, we may not have much time to react." As Laura settled onto the cot, Daniel took her hand, squeezing it tightly. His presence calmed her, even as fear gnawed at the edges of her mind. Dr. Ross adjusted the machinery around them, ensuring everything was in place before beginning. "All right," Dr. Ross said finally, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Here we go." The first jolt of radiation hit Laura like a bolt of lightning. Pain surged through her body, sharp and unrelenting, radiating from her ankle outward. She clenched her teeth, biting back a scream as tears streamed down her face. Daniel held her hand tighter, whispering encouragement under his breath, but the agony consumed her thoughts entirely. On the monitors, Dr. Ross watched the readings closely, adjusting the intensity of the radiation as needed. The synthetic compounds in Laura's bloodstream began to break down, their unnatural glow fading slightly on the screen. But the process was slow and grueling, each second stretching into eternity. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Laura lost track of time. Her vision blurred, and her breath came in ragged gasps. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, and dark spots danced across her eyes. For a moment she thought she might pass out, but sheer willpower kept her conscious. Finally, after what felt like an age, Dr. Ross stepped back. "That's enough for now," she announced, her tone cautious, yet relieved. "We've weakened it significantly, but we need to monitor your condition carefully. The next few hours will tell us whether the organism survives or succumbs." Laura exhaled shakily, her body trembling with exhaustion. Daniel helped her sit up slowly, supporting her weight as she struggled to regain some semblance of strength. "You did great," he murmured, brushing hair away from her damp forehead. "Just hang in there." Over the next several hours, Laura drifted in and out of consciousness. Feverish dreams plagued her, visions of shadowy figures and monstrous creatures haunting her mind. At times, she felt as though the organism inside her was fighting back, clawing its way deeper into her cells. Other times, she sensed a strange emptiness, as if part of her very essence were being stripped away. Dr. Ross remained vigilant, checking Laura's vitals frequently and administering medications to manage the pain. "Her immune system is responding," she reported cautiously to Daniel during one of their brief conversations outside the room. "But the organism isn't gone yet. We've bought ourselves some time, but it's still too early to celebrate." By evening, Laura's condition stabilized somewhat. The swelling in her ankle had decreased and the purple discoloration faded to a dull, bruise-like hue. While her symptoms persisted, heightened senses, occasional bursts of aggression, they seemed less intense than before. "It worked," Laura whispered hoarsely when she found the strength to speak. "Didn't it?" Dr. Ross hesitated before answering. "Partially," she admitted. "The organism is weaker, but traces of it remain dormant within your system. Removing it entirely without risking your life, that's beyond my capabilities. For now, you're stable, but we can't rule out the possibility of resurgence." Though disappointed, Laura accepted the news with quiet determination. "Then we'll deal with it if it happens," she said firmly. "For now, I'm alive. That's all that matters." Despite the partial success, none of them dared relax. They knew they were playing a dangerous game, balancing hope against the ever-present threat of failure, and lurking in the shadows were those who wouldn't hesitate to intervene if they discovered Laura's survival. A day later, as they prepared to leave the cabin, Dr. Ross handed Laura a small device, a portable scanner designed to monitor her condition remotely. "Keep this with you at all times," she instructed. "If the readings change drastically, contact me immediately. I'll do what I can to help from afar." With heartfelt thanks, Laura and Daniel bid farewell to Dr. Ross and set off once, again uncertain of where their journey would lead. They couldn't return home, not while agents and scientists were likely searching for them, but they resolved to keep moving forward, staying one step ahead of whoever pursued them. As they drove, Laura stared out the window, watching the world blur past. The road stretched endlessly before them, symbolizing both freedom and uncertainty. She didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. She refused to give up. Whatever challenges awaited, she would face them head-on, armed with courage, resilience, and the unwavering support of the man beside her. For now, survival was victory enough. Laura and Daniel drove for days, putting as much distance between themselves and the cabin as possible. They avoided highways and major cities, sticking to back roads that twisted through forests, fields, and small towns. Their goal was simple: stay hidden. Every stop they made was brief, a gas station here, a grocery store there, and they paid in cash whenever they could, leaving no trace of their movements. Despite the constant fear of being followed or discovered, Laura felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. The radiation treatment had weakened the organism inside her, giving her a reprieve from its relentless grip. Though traces of it still lingered in her body, dormant and unpredictable, she no longer felt like she was losing control. For now, she was alive, and that was enough. One evening, as they parked near a secluded lake to rest, Laura turned to Daniel. "What happens next?" she asked quietly, staring out at the water shimmering under the moonlight. Daniel sighed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I don't know," he admitted. "We can't go home. Not yet. But we also can't run forever." Laura nodded slowly. She knew he was right. Running wasn't a solution. It was only stalling the inevitable. Sooner or later, they would have to confront the forces chasing them. Whether those forces came in the form of government agents, shadowy organizations tied to Project Chimera, or even the organism inside her, they couldn't avoid the fight indefinitely. The next morning, they decided to head north. Laura remembered something Dr. Ross had mentioned during their time at the cabin. Remote areas where surveillance was minimal, places where people rarely ventured unless they wanted to disappear completely. It was risky, but it might be their best chance to regroup and plan their next move. As they traveled, Laura began experiencing strange sensations again. At first, they were subtle, a flicker of heightened awareness, a sudden surge of strength when lifting heavy objects. But soon, they grew more pronounced. One afternoon, while hiking through a wooded area to stretch their legs, Laura noticed how vividly she could hear the rustling leaves above her, smell the damp earth beneath her boots, and see details of distant birds perched high in the trees. "It's happening again," she muttered, stopping mid-step, stopping. Her voice carried a mix of frustration and fear. Daniel turned to look at her, concern etched across his face. "What do you mean?" "The symptoms," Laura replied, clenching her fists. "They're coming back." He stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Take a breath," he said calmly. "We'll figure this out. Remember what Dr. Ross said. Stay calm and monitor the changes. We've dealt with worse." Though his words reassured her momentarily, Laura couldn't shake the unease building inside her. What if the organism wasn't truly dormant? What if it was biding its time, waiting for the perfect moment to resurface stronger than ever? That night, as they camped in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, Laura pulled out the portable scanner Dr. Ross had given her. She activated it, holding it close to her chest as it hummed softly. The readings confirmed her fears. The organism's activity levels were rising, albeit slowly. It wasn't critical, not yet, but it was a warning sign they couldn't ignore. "What does it say?" Daniel asked, sitting beside her. "It's waking up," Laura said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not fully, but enough to worry me." Daniel frowned, rubbing his temples. "Maybe we should reach out to Dr. Ross again, see if she has any ideas." Laura hesitated. Contacting Dr. Ross meant risking exposure. If anyone was monitoring communications, they could track them down in seconds. Still, what choice did they have? Without help, they were flying blind. The next day, using a secure connection borrowed from a local library, Laura sent a message to Dr. Ross. She kept it short and vague, describing her symptoms without revealing their location. A few hours later, a response arrived. "The organism adapts quickly. Stay mobile. Avoid stress and conflict. It accelerates growth. I'm working on alternative treatments, but progress is slow. Be careful." The message left Laura feeling uneasy. Stay mobile implied they couldn't settle anywhere for long. Avoid stress seemed impossible given their situation, and alternative treatments offered little reassurance when she didn't know what those treatments entailed, or whether they existed at all. Despite the uncertainty, Laura and Daniel pressed on. Days turned into weeks, and their journey became a blur of endless highways, unfamiliar landscapes, and sleepless nights spent listening for sounds of pursuit. Along the way, Laura began to notice something unexpected. The organism inside her wasn't just altering her physically, it was changing her mentally too. Her thoughts grew sharper, almost unnaturally so. She found herself solving problems faster, anticipating outcomes before they happened and noticing patterns others might miss. At times, she felt like a different version of herself, stronger, smarter, more capable, but also detached as though part of her humanity was slipping away. One night, as they sat around a campfire deep in the wilderness, Daniel broached the subject. "You seem different lately," he said cautiously. "Not bad different, just changed." Laura stared into the flames, her reflection dancing in the firelight. "I feel different," she admitted. "Sometimes it's like I'm not entirely in control anymore. Like there's something else inside me, guiding my thoughts." Daniel reached for her hand, his touch grounding her. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. You're still you, Laura, don't forget that." His words brought tears to her eyes. She wanted to believe him, to hold on to the person she used to be. But deep down she wondered how much longer she could resist the changes taking place within her. Eventually, Laura realized they couldn't keep running forever. They needed answers and perhaps justice. Project Chimera had ruined lives, including hers. Someone had to expose the truth, to ensure no one else suffered the same fate. With Daniel's support, Laura devised a plan. Using encrypted channels, they began sharing fragments of information about Project Chimera online, anonymously leaking documents and reports to journalists, activists, and whistleblower networks. Each piece of data added fuel to a growing fire, sparking outrage and demands for accountability. At the same time, Laura started documenting her own experiences, her symptoms, her struggles, her fears, in a journal she hoped would someday serve as evidence. If anything happened to her, she wanted the world to know what had been done to her. Their efforts weren't without risk. Shadows followed them everywhere, in the form of unmarked cars parked outside motels, strangers lingering too long in public, spaces and messages intercepted despite encryption. But Laura refused to back down. She had come too far to give up now. One evening, as they hiked through a remote mountain range, Laura stopped suddenly, gazing at the stars above. "Do you think we'll ever be safe?" she asked, her voice tinged with sadness. Daniel smiled faintly. "Safe doesn't exist for people like us anymore. But we're survivors. That counts for something." Laura nodded, drawing strength from his words. Whatever lay ahead, whether freedom, capture, or something in between, she was ready to face it. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had been betrayed by Project Chimera. In the end, Laura disappeared from public view, leaving behind only rumors and whispers. Some claimed she became a vigilante, hunting down remnants of the project to prevent further disasters. Others believed she vanished into the wilderness, seeking solitude far from prying eyes. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. Laura Dawson would never stop fighting, for justice, for survival, and for the chance to reclaim her humanity. And, somewhere deep in the heart of the forest, under a sky lit by countless stars, she took her first steps toward an uncertain future, armed with nothing but courage, resilience, and the unwavering belief that even in darkness, light could. Laura Dawson lived a simple life in a quiet suburb of Ohio. She was the kind of person who enjoyed routine, waking up early, drinking coffee while reading the newspaper, and spending time with her husband, Daniel, after work. They had been married for 5 years, and their life together was predictable but happy. On most evenings, Laura liked to take a walk through the local park near their home. It was her way of unwinding after a long day. The park was beautiful, especially in the late afternoon when the sun cast long shadows across the grassy fields and tree-lined paths. Laura loved how peaceful it felt there. The air smelled fresh, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and damp earth. Birds chirped softly overhead, and squirrels darted between the trees, busy gathering food for the coming winter. To Laura, these walks were a chance to clear her mind and enjoy nature's beauty. One particular evening, however, things took an unexpected turn. It had been a normal day. Nothing out of the ordinary. After dinner, Laura slipped on her sneakers and headed out for her usual stroll. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Everything seemed calm and perfect. As Laura walked along one of the narrow dirt paths that wound through the park, She noticed something unusual about the bushes lining the trail. There were clusters of wildflowers growing nearby, their petals glowing faintly in the fading light. Laura slowed down to admire them, thinking how pretty they looked. But then, just as she stepped closer, she felt a sharp sting on her ankle. At first, she didn't think much of it. Maybe it was a thorn or a twig brushing against her skin. People often got scratched walking through places like this. Laura stopped and bent over to check her ankle. When she rolled up the hem of her jeans, though, she saw something strange. 2 tiny puncture marks stood out against her pale skin. They weren't deep, but they were definitely bite marks. Laura frowned. What could have bitten her? She glanced around, searching for any signs of movement among the bushes. Was it a spider? Or maybe a snake? She'd heard stories about snakes, hiding in tall grasses waiting to strike unsuspecting passers-by, but nothing moved. The area seemed completely still, almost eerily so. She touched the spot gently, wincing at the slight pain. It wasn't unbearable, just enough to make her notice it. Deciding not to worry too much, Laura brushed off the incident and continued her walk. She told herself it was probably nothing serious. Bugs bit people all the time, right? Besides, she had already come this far into the park, and turning back now felt silly. By the time Laura returned home, the bite had started to itch. She washed it carefully in the sink, applying some antiseptic cream before covering it with a bandage. Daniel was sitting on the couch watching TV when she walked into the living room. He glanced up briefly and asked if she'd had a good walk. "It was fine," Laura replied, trying to sound casual. "Just something bit me, I think." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Bit you? Like what?" "I don't know. Some bug, maybe." She shrugged. "It's no big deal." He nodded but gave her a skeptical look. "You sure? You should keep an eye on it. Sometimes bites can get infected." "I will," Laura promised, though inwardly she dismissed his concern. It was just a little bite. How bad could it be? Over the next few hours, however, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As she sat reading a book, she found herself absent-mindedly scratching at the bandage on her ankle. The itching hadn't gone away. If anything, it had gotten worse. And when she finally went to bed, she tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. When morning came, Laura woke up groggily and stretched. Her first thought was of the bite. She sat up and peeled off the bandage to take another look. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. The skin around the puncture marks had turned an odd shade, of purple spreading outward like ink spilled on paper. The area was swollen and tender to the touch. Now genuinely worried, Laura decided to visit Dr. Alan Miller, her family physician. She called the clinic and scheduled an appointment for later that day. Daniel offered to go with her, but she insisted he stay home. "It's probably nothing," she said, forcing a smile. Deep down, though, she wasn't so sure. On the drive to the clinic, Laura tried to convince herself that everything would be okay. Maybe the doctor would tell her it was just an allergic reaction or a minor infection. Still, the image of those purple marks lingered in her mind, refusing to fade. When she arrived at the clinic, the waiting room was half empty. Laura signed in and took a seat, flipping idly through a magazine while she waited. Her leg throbbed faintly beneath the fresh bandage she'd applied earlier. Each passing minute felt longer than the last. Finally, a nurse called her name. Laura followed her into an examination room, where she was asked to sit on a padded table. A few minutes later, Dr. Miller entered. He was a middle-aged man with thinning gray hair and a kind face. Laura had known him for years, and he always had a reassuring presence. "Good morning, Laura," he said warmly. "What brings you here today?" She pointed to her ankle. "I got bitten by something yesterday evening. At first, I thought it was nothing, but now it looks weird." Dr. Miller nodded and pulled up a stool. "Let's take a look." Laura rolled up her pant leg again, revealing the discolored skin. Dr. Miller leaned in closer, his brow furrowing as he examined the wound. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he reached for a pair of gloves and began touching the area lightly, pressing here and there to gauge the swelling. "This doesn't look like a typical insect bite," he murmured, more to himself than to Laura. His tone was measured, but there was an edge of concern in his voice. "What do you mean?" Laura asked, her stomach tightening. Dr. Miller hesitated. "I'm not entirely sure yet. Have you experienced any other symptoms? Fever? Nausea? Dizziness?" "No, nothing like that," Laura replied quickly. "But it hurts more than it should. And the color, it's really strange." Dr. Miller nodded slowly. He seemed lost in thought, staring at the bite as though trying to piece together a puzzle. After a long pause, he stood up and excused himself. "I need to step out for a moment," he said. "I'll be right back." Left alone in the room, Laura felt a growing sense of unease. Why did Dr. Miller seem so troubled? She stared at the ceiling, counting the tiles to distract herself. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. When Dr. Miller returned, his expression had changed. Gone was the calm professionalism. Instead, he looked uneasy, almost frightened. He sat down across from Laura and cleared his throat. "Laura," he began, choosing his words carefully, "this isn't something we see every day. Whatever bit you... well, it's not normal. I want you to go to the hospital immediately for further testing." The words hit Laura like a punch to the gut. Not normal? What did that even mean? Before she could ask any questions, Dr. Miller handed her a referral slip and urged her to leave as soon as possible. His demeanor left no room for argument. Driving home, Laura replayed the conversation in her head. Something about the way Dr. Miller had reacted unsettled her deeply. It wasn't just concern, it was fear. Real, genuine fear. And that scared her more than anything else.